The knock came at exactly 8:10 in the morning. I remember because I was standing at my kitchen counter, coffee halfway to my lips, staring at the clock on the microwave and wondering why my daughter hadn't returned any of my calls for the past week. 7 days of silence from Maya, who usually texted me at least twice daily with updates about her cases, complaints about Seattle traffic, or photos of whatever elaborate meal her partner Dominic had cooked that evening. 7 days of my messages sitting unread, my calls going straight to voicemail, and a growing unease in my chest that felt eerily familiar to the instinct that had guided me through 28 years as a financial crimes investigator. When that knock finally came, sharp and desperate against my front door, I knew before I even set down my mug that something had shattered in my daughter's carefully constructed life. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I pulled open the door to find Maya standing on my porch in wrinkled clothes I recognized from 3 days ago based on the photo she'd posted on social media. Her usually sleek black hair hanging limp around her face, mascara smudged beneath red-rimmed eyes. She was clutching her phone in one hand and a crumpled piece of paper in the other, and when she looked up at me, the devastation in her expression made my stomach drop. "Mom," she whispered, her voice cracking. "He's gone. Everything's gone." I pulled her inside immediately, wrapping my arms around her as she collapsed against me, her whole body shaking with silent sobs. My mind was already racing, cataloging details with the methodical precision that had made me one of the most successful investigators in the Portland field office before my retirement 2 years ago. The trembling in her hands, the way she kept glancing at her phone, as though expecting it to deliver some explanation that would make sense of whatever catastrophe had occurred. The paper she clutched, which I could now see was a bank statement. "Maya, sweetheart, I need you to breathe," I said gently, guiding her to the living room couch. "Sit down. I'm going to get you some water, and then you're going to tell me exactly what happened." She nodded mutely, sinking into the cushions as I hurried to the kitchen. My hands were steady as I filled a glass, but my mind was anything but calm. In all of Maya's 32 years, I had never seen her like this. Even during her divorce from her first husband 5 years ago, she had maintained her composure, handling the separation with the same cool professionalism she brought to her work as a senior investment analyst at Cascade Financial Group. Maya was the type of person who color-coded her closet and kept spreadsheets for her grocery shopping. She didn't fall apart. She didn't show up at her mother's door at 8 in the morning looking like she hadn't slept in days. Unless something truly catastrophic had occurred. I returned to find her staring blankly at the bank statement, tears streaming silently down her cheeks. I sat beside her, pressing the water into her hand and waiting. One thing I'd learned in nearly 3 decades of interviewing witnesses and suspects was that silence often extracted truth more effectively than questions. "I woke up yesterday morning," she finally began, her voice hollow, "and Dominic was gone. Not just gone to work early. Actually gone. His clothes, his toiletries, his laptop, everything. Like he'd never lived there at all." I felt a cold prickle run down my spine but kept my expression neutral, encouraging her to continue. "At first I thought maybe there was some emergency with his family in Vancouver. His mother's been sick, you know, so I tried calling him." She laughed bitterly. 63 times, Mom. I called him 63 times yesterday. Every single call went to a disconnected number message. My investigator's instinct flared. People didn't disconnect their phones without planning. This wasn't spontaneous. "I went to work because I didn't know what else to do," Maya continued, her words coming faster now, tumbling over each other. "I thought maybe he'd show up, or call my office or something. But then I got a notification from our bank. A fraud alert on our joint account." Her hand tightened around the crumpled statement. "Only it wasn't fraud, Mom. It was Dominic. He transferred everything. Every single dollar from our joint savings, our investment account, even the emergency fund we'd been building for the down payment on a house. $347,000. Gone." The number hit me like a physical blow. That was a substantial sum, representing years of careful saving and investment. I took the statement from her trembling hands, my trained eyes quickly scanning the transactions. Multiple wire transfers over the past week, each just below the threshold that would have triggered immediate bank scrutiny. Small enough to slip through automated systems but carefully timed and executed. This wasn't impulsive theft. This was calculated, premeditated financial fraud. "There's more," Maya whispered, and I looked up to see fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. "I found a charge on our credit card. A jewelry store in Vancouver. $15,000 for an engagement ring." She met my eyes and the pain in them was unbearable. "He bought an engagement ring, Mom. While he was stealing our money. While he was planning to leave me. He was buying a ring for someone else." The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. The week of silence suddenly made sense. Maya had probably been in shock, trying to process the betrayal, hoping there was some explanation. But there was no innocent explanation for this pattern of behavior. "Do you know who she is?" I asked quietly. Maya nodded, pulling out her phone with shaking hands. She opened Instagram and showed me a photo. A young woman, maybe 26 or 27, with copper red hair and a bright smile, standing in front of what looked like a trendy Vancouver coffee shop. The caption read, "Starting my new life with my soulmate. Sometimes the universe brings you exactly who you need when you need them most." Posted 2 days ago. Tag location, Vancouver, British Columbia. "Her name is Sienna Caldwell," Maya said dully. "She's a yoga instructor he met at that wellness retreat he went to 6 months ago. The one he said was for executive stress management." Another bitter laugh. "I encouraged him to go, Mom. I thought it would be good for him. He'd been so stressed about his consulting business, working such long hours. I thought he needed to relax." I studied the photo more carefully, my investigator's brain noting details. Expensive activewear. Professional manicure. The coffee shop behind her looked high-end. This wasn't someone struggling financially. But $347,000 would certainly fund a comfortable new start for a couple. "What about his consulting business?" I asked. "Have you checked on that?" Maya's face crumpled. "There is no consulting business. I drove to the office address he gave me. It's a mailbox at a UPS store. I called the clients he mentioned. Half of them don't exist. The other half have never heard of him." The betrayal went deeper than I'd initially realized. This wasn't just about money or infidelity. Dominic had been living a double life, constructing an elaborate web of lies while systematically positioning himself to drain Maya's accounts and disappear. "How long were you together?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. I was stalling, giving myself time to think, to plan. 3 years. We moved in together after 8 months. Everything seemed perfect. Maya's voice broke. "He was so supportive of my career, always encouraging me to take on bigger clients, more responsibility. He handled all our finances because I was so busy at work. He said he wanted to take that stress off my plate." There it was. The classic setup. Isolate the victim from their own financial awareness, gain complete control of the accounts, and then vanish. I'd seen this pattern hundreds of times in my career, though usually in the context of investment fraud or money laundering. The personal betrayal added a layer of cruelty that made my blood boil. "Maya, I need you to listen to me very carefully," I said, my voice taking on the calm, authoritative tone I'd used in countless interrogations. "What Dominic did is not just betrayal. It's wire fraud, identity theft, and possibly several other federal crimes. But before we can do anything about it, I need to know everything. Every detail you can remember about the past 3 years, especially the past 6 months." She nodded, wiping at her eyes. I should have seen it coming. There were signs. "Don't do that," I said firmly. "Don't blame yourself for trusting someone you loved. That's exactly what people like Dominic count on. Now start from the beginning. How did you meet?" Over the next hour, Maya recounted the story of their relationship. They'd met at a charity gala for the Portland Art Museum, where Dominic had been charming, attentive, and seemingly successful. He'd told her he ran a boutique management consulting firm specializing in tech startups, which explained his flexible schedule and occasional trips to Vancouver and San Francisco. He'd moved into her condo in the Pearl District after 8 months, contributing to rent and utilities, though Maya now realized those contributions had been minimal compared to her own earnings. The red flags had been subtle. His vagueness about his client list, citing confidentiality agreements. His reluctance to attend her work functions, claiming he didn't want to overshadow her accomplishments. The way he'd gradually taken over their financial management, consolidating their accounts, and suggesting they pool their savings for better investment opportunities. Maya, overwhelmed with a demanding promotion to senior analyst, had been grateful for his help. "He was so good at making me feel taken care of," she said softly. "After my divorce, after years of being the one holding everything together, it felt amazing to have someone else handle things for a change." I understood. Maya's first husband had been emotionally distant and financially irresponsible, leaving her to manage everything while he pursued one failed business venture after another. Dominic must have seemed like the opposite, a competent partner who could share the burden. It was a calculated seduction. "What about the wellness retreat 6 months ago?" I prompted.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
"Tell me about that." Maya's expression darkened. He'd been talking about burnout, about needing to reset. He found this place in Whistler, some exclusive resort that offered meditation, yoga, executive coaching. It was expensive, $12,000 for 2 weeks, but he said it was necessary for his mental health. I paid for it from our savings because his business account was supposedly tied up in a major contract. Of course it was. I'd bet everything I owned that there had been no wellness retreat, or if there had been, Sienna Caldwell had been there too, and those 2 weeks had been spent planning exactly this scenario. After he came back, did anything change? I asked. She thought for a moment. He seemed more distant. Started working longer hours, taking more trips to Vancouver. He said he'd made connections at the retreat that were leading to new business opportunities. I believed him. Her voice caught. I always believed him. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. A text from my former colleague, Detective James Morrison, whom I'd messaged while Maya was recounting her story. His response was brief but concerning. Ran the name. "Dominic Pierce has 3 aliases and a history. Call me ASAP." I excused myself and stepped into the kitchen, dialing James's number immediately. He answered on the second ring. "Diane," he said without preamble, "your daughter's boyfriend is a professional. Real name is probably Dominic Thorne, though he's used at least 6 different identities in the past decade. We've had reports from Seattle, Vancouver, and San Francisco. Same pattern every time. Targets successful women, usually in finance or tech, builds trust, gains access to accounts, and disappears. He's good at staying just under the radar for serious prosecution." My hands tightened around the phone. How much has he taken in total? Conservatively, over $2 million across 8 known victims. But Diane, here's the thing. He's never been successfully prosecuted. By the time the victims realize what's happening, he's across international borders. He's careful about staying below federal prosecution thresholds on individual transactions, and his victims often don't report immediately because of the embarrassment factor. What about the woman he's with now? Sienna Caldwell? James was quiet for a moment. No record of anyone by that name in Vancouver matching the age range. I'd bet money it's another alias, possibly a partner in the con. These operations often work in pairs. I felt rage building in my chest, cold and clarifying. This wasn't just about stealing money. This was about systematically destroying people's lives, their trust, their sense of safety in the world. And he'd done it to my daughter. "James, I need everything you can get me. Every alias, every known associate, every bank account you can track. And I need it yesterday. Diane, you know I can't just hand over an active investigation file. Then open an official investigation," I said flatly. "I'm filing a formal complaint on behalf of my daughter within the hour. Wire fraud, identity theft, interstate financial crimes. And if you find any connection to the other victims, we might be looking at a RICO case." He sighed. "I'll see what I can do. But Diane, be careful. If this guy realizes someone's onto him with this level of detail, he'll disappear completely. We might never get him." "That's not going to happen," I promised. "Not this time." When I returned to the living room, Maya was staring at her phone again, scrolling through old photos of her and Dominic. Happy moments at restaurants, hiking in the gorge, a weekend trip to Cannon Beach. all of it now poisoned by the knowledge of his betrayal. Maya, I said gently, sitting beside her. I just spoke with a detective friend of mine. Dominic isn't who he said he was. His real name might be Dominic Thorne, and you're not his first victim. She looked up at me, shock registering through her grief. What? I told her everything James had shared, watching as the revelation transformed her expression from devastation to something harder, more focused. This was the Maya I recognized, the brilliant analyst who could dissect complex financial patterns and identify fraud. The shock and heartbreak were giving way to anger, and anger could be channeled into action. How many others? She asked quietly. At least 7 that they know of. Probably more who never reported. Maya stood abruptly, pacing to the window. $347,000, she said, her voice tight. 3 years of my life. My trust, my sense of judgment. She turned to face me, and I saw tears streaming down her face again, but this time they were tears of rage. He took everything, Mom. Not just the money. He took my ability to trust my own instincts. He made me doubt myself. I stood and crossed to her, taking her hands in mine. Then we're going to get it back. Not just the money, though we'll fight for that too. But your confidence, your sense of self. We're going to make sure he faces consequences for what he's done, and we're going to make sure he can't do this to anyone else. How? She asked, searching my face. If he's done this before and gotten away with it, how do we stop him? A slow smile spread across my face, the kind of smile that used to make suspects nervous during interrogations. Because he's never dealt with someone like me before. And because you, my brilliant daughter, are going to help me build a case so airtight that even the best defense attorney in the country won't be able to break it. Maya's expression shifted, hope beginning to kindle beneath the anger and pain. What do we do first? First, we document everything. Every transaction, every conversation, every text message. We're going to reconstruct his entire con from the beginning. Then we're going to figure out where he really is, because I guarantee you he's not actually in Vancouver. But the Instagram post could be from anywhere. VPN spoofing location is trivial. We need to follow the money, not social media breadcrumbs. I pulled out my laptop, opening it on the coffee table. You're going to log into every account you shared, every credit card, every investment platform. We need to see the full picture of where the money went. Maya settled beside me, her analyst brain finally engaging with the problem instead of just reeling from the emotional impact. The wire transfers all went to an account at Pacific Northwest Credit Union. But when I tried to get information, they said it was closed. Of course it was. He'd have had a secondary account set up to receive the transfers, then immediately moved the funds elsewhere before closing the first account. It's money laundering 101. My fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up databases I technically no longer had access to, but had maintained connections to through former colleagues. But every transfer leaves a trail, even if he tried to obscure it. We just have to know where to look. Over the next several hours, we worked in focused silence, broken only by occasional questions or discoveries. Maya pulled up 3 years of financial records, and I began building a timeline, noting every significant transaction, every unusual pattern. What emerged was a portrait of methodical theft. Dominic had started small, a few hundred here, 1,000 there, always with plausible explanations. Medical expenses for his mother. Emergency repairs for his car. A client who'd paid him in cash that he'd deposited into their joint account, making himself look generous while actually using Maya's money all along. Then, 6 months ago, right around the time of the supposed wellness retreat, the amounts had increased dramatically. 20,000 transferred to a new investment account he'd convinced Maya to open, promising better returns. 30,000 for a business opportunity that would pay out within months. 50,000 to cover a gap in his taxes from the previous year. Each time Maya had authorized the transfers, trusting that Dominic was managing their finances responsibly. I can't believe I fell for this, she said at one point, staring at the spreadsheet of transactions. I analyze financial fraud for a living. This is literally what I do. How did I not see it? Because he was in your home, in your bed, in your life, I said quietly. He had access to you in ways that made normal scrutiny impossible. That's why these predators target intimate relationships. The emotional bond creates blind spots. By late afternoon, we had a comprehensive picture of the financial theft. But we still had no concrete lead on where Dominic actually was, or how to recover the funds. I'd put in calls to 3 more former colleagues, including a forensic accountant who specialized in tracking offshore transfers and a private investigator who'd helped me on several high-profile cases. Everyone was pulling resources, but Dominic had clearly planned this well. Then Maya's phone rang. She looked at the screen and went pale. "It's him," she whispered. I moved quickly to her side. "Put it on speaker, and try to keep him talking as long as possible. I'm going to record this." With trembling hands, Maya answered. "Hello. Maya, baby, I'm so sorry." Dominic's voice filled the room, smooth and apologetic. "I know you must be confused and angry, and you have every right to be. But I need you to understand that I never wanted to hurt you." Maya's jaw tightened, but she kept her voice controlled. "Where are you, Dominic? I can't tell you that right now. But I promise I'll explain everything soon. This isn't what it looks like." "Really?" Bitterness crept into her tone. "Because it looks like you stole $300,000 and ran off with another woman." A pause. "You saw Sienna's post. Hard to miss." "Maya, listen to me. Sienna is helping me with something important. I'm in the middle of a major business deal, something that's going to set us up for life. I needed liquid capital fast, and I couldn't explain everything because of NDAs. But once this closes, I'm going to pay back every penny with interest. You have to trust me." It was masterful manipulation, I had to admit. The appeal to trust, the promise of even greater returns, the suggestion that this was all part of some legitimate business dealing. I could see Maya wavering, wanting desperately to believe that there was an explanation that didn't mean everything in their relationship had been a lie. I scribbled a note and held it up to her. "Ask about the other women." Maya read it and took a breath. "Is that what you told the women in Seattle? In San Francisco? Did they just have to trust you too?" Silence on the other end. A long damning silence. "What are you talking about?" Dominic finally said, but his voice had changed, the smooth confidence replaced by wariness. "I know who you are, Dominic. Or should I call you Dominic Thorne? I know about the other women you've conned. I know this is what you do." "Maya, whoever told you that is lying. They're trying to turn you against me because they don't understand our relationship. Your mother, right? She's never liked me." I felt a flash of cold anger. Of course he was trying to isolate her even now, to make her doubt the people trying to help her. "My mother is the only person who's been honest with me," Maya said, her voice strengthening. "Unlike you who lied about everything. Your business, your clients, your whole life. You're a fraud, Dominic. And I'm going to make sure you face consequences for what you've done. If you go to the police, you'll never see that money again," he said, and now his voice had hardened too, the charming mask slipping. "I've moved it somewhere you'll never find it. But if you're smart, if you just give me a few weeks, I can make this right. Don't throw away what we have over a misunderstanding." "What we had," Maya corrected. "And it was never real, was it? Everything was part of the con." "Not everything," he said, and there was something in his voice that might have been genuine regret. "I did care about you, Maya. More than I've cared about anyone in a long time. That's why I'm trying to give you a chance here. Drop this, walk away, and I'll make sure you get something back. Keep pushing and you'll end up with nothing." It was a threat disguised as an offer. I scribbled another note. "Keep him talking. We need location data." "If you cared about me, you wouldn't have stolen from me," Maya said. "You wouldn't have lied to me for 3 years. Life is complicated, Maya. Sometimes we do things we're not proud of. But I'm asking you, please just give me a chance to make this right." In the background of the call, I heard something. A distinctive sound, electronic and rhythmic. An announcement system. I grabbed my laptop, pulling up sound analysis software I still had from my investigative days. "I need time to think," Maya said, catching my signal. "This is all too much to process." "Take all the time you need," Dominic said, sounding relieved. "But please don't do anything hasty. Don't go to the police. Just wait for me to contact you again, okay?" "Okay," Maya lied. After he hung up, I played back the recording, isolating the background noise. It took several minutes of filtering, But finally I had it clean enough to identify. An airport announcement, specifically in French and English. I ran it through a database of airport announcement patterns. Vancouver International, I said triumphantly. He's at the airport. Or he was when he made that call. Maya looked at the timestamp. That was 20 minutes ago. He could be anywhere by now. Or he could still be there waiting for a flight. I was already dialing James Morrison again. We need airport security to flag his passport, all his known aliases. If he's trying to leave the country, we can stop him. But even as I made the call, I knew we were likely too late. Dominic Thorne was a professional, and he wouldn't make a call from an airport unless he was confident he'd be gone before anyone could react. Still, it was a lead, and in investigations even small leads could crack cases wide open. James put out the alert, but as I'd suspected, by the time airport security checked, there was no sign of Dominic under any of his known aliases. Either he'd already boarded a flight or he'd been calling from somewhere else entirely, using VPN spoofing to make it seem like he was at the airport. He's always one step ahead, Maya said, slumping back against the couch cushions. We're never going to catch him. I sat beside her, taking her hand. That's what he wants you to think. But Maya, I've spent nearly 3 decades tracking people who thought they were smarter than the system. And I've caught them all eventually. Dominic made a mistake by calling you. He gave us evidence of his consciousness of guilt, and he revealed that he's nervous. People make mistakes when they're nervous. What do we do now? Now we fight back, I said. But not the way he expects. We're not just going to chase him. We're going to build something bigger. We're going to find the other victims, document everything, and build a federal case that will follow him wherever he runs. And we're going to make sure that when he finally feels safe again, when he thinks he's gotten away with it, that's when we spring the trap. Maya looked at me with a mixture of grief and determination. I want him to pay for what he's done. Not just to me but to all of us. He will, I promised. But first we need to get you somewhere safe. Somewhere you can rest and process everything that's happened. Then tomorrow we start building our case in earnest. As the sun set outside my living room window, I helped Maya settle into my guest room. The same room where she'd stayed as a child whenever she'd had nightmares or needed comfort. She'd been so small then, so certain that her mother could fix anything. Now she was a grown woman facing a betrayal that no mother's hug could heal. But I was determined to give her something better. Justice. After Maya finally fell into an exhausted sleep, I returned to my laptop, studying the financial records with fresh eyes. Somewhere in these transactions was a pattern that would lead us to Dominic. Every thief had habits, preferences, tells that gave them away. I just had to find his. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Stop looking for him. You won't like what happens if you keep pushing. I stared at the message, feeling that familiar cold clarity settle over me. Dominic was making another mistake. He'd revealed that we'd rattled him enough to resort to threats. And threats meant vulnerability. I replied with a single word. Try me. Then I settled in for a long night of investigation. Because Dominic Thorne had made one critical error in judgment. He'd underestimated what a mother would do to protect her daughter. And that mistake was going to cost him everything. I woke at dawn to find Maya already awake in the kitchen. Her laptop open beside a fresh pot of coffee she'd somehow managed to make despite her exhaustion. The dark circles under her eyes told me she hadn't slept much, but there was a different quality to her now. The shock and devastation from yesterday had crystallized into something sharper, more focused. I've been going through my email archives, she said without preamble as I poured myself a cup, looking for anything I might have missed, and I found something strange. She turned the laptop toward me, showing an email thread from 18 months ago. It was correspondence between Maya and someone named Jennifer Ashford, who identified herself as a friend of Dominic's ex-girlfriend. I'd completely forgotten about this, Maya said, scrolling through the messages. This woman reached out saying she needed to warn me about Dominic, that he'd done something similar to her friend. I showed the email to Dominic and he explained that Jennifer was actually his ex, not a friend of his ex, and that she was harassing him because he'd ended things. He even showed me a restraining order he claimed to have filed against her. My investigator senses tingled. Did you ever verify that restraining order? Maya's face fell. No. I trusted him. He seemed so genuinely distressed about being stalked by a vindictive ex. I blocked Jennifer's email and never responded. Do you still have her contact information? The email address is here, but I don't know if it's still active. She highlighted the address, Jennifer Ashford, 2981@gmail.com. I pulled out my phone and texted James Morrison, asking him to track down anyone named Jennifer Ashford who might have been involved with Dominic Thorne. Then I composed a careful email to the address Maya had shown me. Dear Jennifer, my name is Diane Keller, and I'm the mother of Maya Chan. I believe you tried to contact my daughter approximately 18 months ago regarding Dominic Pierce, who also goes by Dominic Thorne. Maya is now in a similar situation to what you described in your original email. If you're willing, we would very much appreciate the opportunity to speak with you about your experience. This information could be crucial in building a case against him. I included my phone number and pressed send, not particularly hopeful that an email address from 18 months ago would still be monitored. But in investigations you followed every thread no matter how thin. Maya watched me work with a kind of hungry attention, as though observing my methodology could somehow help her make sense of what had happened to her. I understood that impulse. After betrayal, people craved patterns, explanations, anything that could restore order to chaos. Mom, she said quietly, when you were working cases, how did you deal with victims who blamed themselves? Because I can't stop thinking about all the moments I should have questioned him, all the signs I ignored. I set down my coffee and looked at her directly. Maya, I'm going to tell you something I learned after nearly 3 decades in this work. The best victims, the ones predators target most successfully, are often the smartest, most capable people. Do you know why? She shook her head. Because intelligent people are invested in making sense of things. When something doesn't add up, your instinct is to find the explanation that makes it logical rather than accepting that you're being deliberately deceived. Dominic counted on that. He built a framework of plausible lies that your rational mind could accept because the alternative, that someone you loved was systematically destroying your life, was too painful to contemplate. But I'm a financial analyst, Maya protested. I should have seen the patterns. You were analyzing the data he wanted you to see. He controlled the information flow. That's not a failure of intelligence, Maya. That's the nature of intimate fraud. I reached across the table and took her hand. The shame you're feeling is part of his weapon. He's counting on you being too embarrassed to report him, too worried about looking foolish. That's how he's gotten away with this for so long. Maya's phone buzzed. She glanced at it and her expression hardened. It's Dominic again. Another text. I moved to look over her shoulder. The message read, I meant what I said yesterday. I never wanted to hurt you. But you need to understand that if you pursue this, you'll destroy any chance of recovering your money. The accounts I moved it to are complex, offshore structures that will take years to unravel through legal channels. By then it'll be long gone. Work with me and I can make sure you get at least half back. Fight me and you get nothing. He's trying to negotiate, I said, my mind already working through the implications. That's actually good news. How is that good news? Maya asked incredulously. Because people only negotiate when they feel pressure. He's worried about something, probably that we've made more progress than he expected. He's trying to regain control of the situation by offering you a choice between a partial recovery and nothing. But what if he's right? What if pursuing this legally means I never see any of that money again? I considered my words carefully. Maya, I need you to understand something. This isn't really about the money, though we're absolutely going to fight for that. This is about power and control. If you accept his terms, you're validating his entire approach. You're telling him that he can steal from people, ruin their lives, and then negotiate a settlement that lets him walk away with most of his gains. How many more women will he do this to if there are no real consequences? So you think I should ignore his offer? I think we should use it to our advantage. But first we need more information. My phone rang. James Morrison's name appeared on the screen. Give me a minute. I stepped into the living room. James, tell me you have something. Jennifer Ashford is real, he said without preamble. Age 34, works as a software engineer in Seattle. And Diane, She filed a police report against Dominic Thorne 3 years ago, claiming he'd defrauded her of nearly $200,000. The case was dropped due to insufficient evidence. My pulse quickened. Do you have her current contact information? I'm texting it to you now. But there's more. I found 2 other women in the database who filed similar reports. One in San Francisco, one in Vancouver. All 3 cases were dropped or resulted in no charges. The pattern is clear, but the individual cases were never strong enough to prosecute. What if we could connect them all? Show a pattern of behavior across jurisdictions? That's federal RICO territory, James said. You'd need to prove an ongoing criminal enterprise. It's a high bar. But not impossible. Not for you, maybe. I could hear the smile in his voice. I'm forwarding you everything I can access without getting my badge pulled. The rest you'll have to develop on your own. After hanging up, I returned to the kitchen where Maya was staring at her laptop screen with an expression I couldn't quite read. I found her, she said. Jennifer Ashford. She has a LinkedIn profile. Software engineer at TechCore Solutions in Seattle. She turned the screen toward me. Mom, she looks so much like me. Dark hair, similar age, works in finance-adjacent tech. It's like he has a type. I studied the profile photo. Maya was right. The resemblance wasn't exact, but there was a similarity in bearing, in the professional competence that radiated from both women's faces. It suggested Dominic's targeting wasn't random. He selected victims who fit a specific profile, probably because he'd refined his approach to work best on that particular demographic. I'm going to call her, Maya said, reaching for her phone. Wait. I put a hand on her arm. Let me do it first. If she had a traumatic experience with Dominic, hearing from another victim directly might be overwhelming. Let me make the initial contact, feel out where she is emotionally, and then we can arrange a conversation if she's willing. Maya nodded reluctantly, and I dialed the number James had sent. After 3 rings, a cautious voice answered. Hello. Is this Jennifer Ashford? Who's asking? My name is Diane Keller. I'm a retired financial crimes investigator, and I'm calling about Dominic Thorne. I understand you had an experience with him several years ago. Silence. Then, how did you get my number? Through a contact in law enforcement. I apologize for the intrusion, but this is important. Dominic has targeted my daughter, and we're trying to build a case against him. Your testimony could be crucial. Another long pause. Your daughter. Is she okay? Physically, yes. Financially and emotionally, she's been devastated. He took over $300,000 from her accounts before disappearing. Of course he did. Jennifer's voice was bitter. That's what he does. How long were they together? 3 years. 3 years, Jennifer repeated. He only needed 2 with me. I guess I wasn't as profitable. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. I'm sorry. That's not fair to your daughter. I know exactly what she's going through. I believe you do. Jennifer, I know this is difficult, but would you be willing to talk to us? Share your experience? We're trying to establish a pattern that could support federal charges. I already tried that, she said flatly. I filed a police report. I hired a lawyer. I spent 6 months and another $20,000 trying to get justice, and in the end I got nothing. The prosecutor said there wasn't enough evidence because Dominic had been clever about making the transfers look consensual. My lawyer said I'd spend more money fighting him than I'd ever recover. That was 3 years ago, I said carefully. Since then, he's targeted at least 4 more women that we know of. With multiple victims willing to testify to the same pattern, we have a much stronger case. Why would any of us want to put ourselves through that again? Jennifer's voice cracked slightly. Do you know what it's like to have your judgment questioned? To have lawyers imply you were just a naive woman who got taken advantage of because you were desperate for love? To have your financial decisions dissected and criticized by people who weren't there, who didn't see how convincing he was? I did know, actually. I'd watched hundreds of victims go through that process, seen how the legal system could re-traumatize people who were already suffering. But I also knew that sometimes that difficult process was the only path to justice. Jennifer, I understand your reluctance. And I promise you, if you decide you don't want to be involved, I'll respect that completely. But I also want you to know that Dominic is still out there, still targeting women, still destroying lives. Without consequences, he'll keep doing this until someone stops him. Why does it have to be me who stops him? She asked, and I heard the exhaustion in her voice. Why do we always have to be the ones who sacrifice more, who put ourselves through hell just to maybe, possibly, get some kind of justice? Because we're the only ones who can, I said quietly. The system is designed to make this hard, to make victims give up. Dominic knows that. He's counting on it. But Jennifer, if we work together, if we present a unified case with multiple victims, we might actually succeed where individual efforts have failed. Another long silence. Then, I need to think about it. This is a lot to process. Of course. Take whatever time you need. Can I give you my daughter's number as well? I think it might help both of you to talk to someone who truly understands what you've been through. Okay, Jennifer said reluctantly. But I'm not making any promises. After I hung up, Maya looked at me with a mixture of hope and apprehension. Will she help us? I don't know. She's been through this before, and it didn't end well for her. That kind of experience makes people understandably cautious about trying again. But if she doesn't help, if none of the other victims will come forward, how do we build a pattern case? We find another way, I said firmly. Investigation isn't about having one perfect path to success. It's about pursuing every avenue until you find the ones that work. My laptop chimed with an incoming email. The sender was Jennifer Ashford, 2981@gmail.com, the address Maya had shown me earlier. I opened it immediately. Dear Diane, I've spent the last hour since our phone call thinking about what you said. I've also spent the last 3 years trying to move on from what Dominic did to me, trying to rebuild my savings and my ability to trust. Some days are better than others. Your call made it a bad day because it brought everything back. But it also made me realize something. I've been living with this fear that he's out there somewhere, doing this to other people, and wondering if I should have fought harder. Maybe I can't get my money back. Maybe I can't undo the damage he did to me. But maybe I can help stop him from hurting anyone else. I'm willing to talk to you and your daughter. I'm willing to share my story. I'm even willing to testify if it comes to that. But I need something in return. I need to know that this time we're going to win. I can't go through this process again just to watch him walk away. If you can promise me that we're going to make this case airtight, that we're going to do everything possible to ensure he faces real consequences, then I'm in. Let me know when and where you want to meet. Jennifer. I read the email aloud to Maya, who had tears streaming down her face by the time I finished. She's willing to help, Maya whispered. Even after everything, she's willing to help. That's who Dominic underestimated, I said. He thought he could break women and they'd stay broken. He didn't account for the fact that trauma can also forge strength. Over the next hour, I made calls to the other 2 women James had identified. The conversation with Rachel Martinez in San Francisco was brief and painful. She'd lost her job after Dominic's theft had left her unable to make rent, and she'd spent the past year rebuilding her life from scratch. When I explained what we were trying to do, she'd cried. I want to help, she'd said. But I can't afford to take time off work to travel for depositions or court appearances. I'm barely making ends meet as it is. We'll figure out the logistics, I promised. If necessary, we can do video depositions. But Rachel, your testimony could make the difference. Then I'll do it, she said. He took enough from me. I won't let him take my voice too. The third woman, Claire Dubois from Vancouver, was harder to track down. The phone number James had provided was disconnected, and her social media accounts had been deleted. I found her eventually through professional licensing records. She was a chartered accountant, but when I called her office, her assistant said she was unavailable, and would I like to leave a message. I left my number and a careful explanation of why I was calling, knowing that Claire might never return the call. Some victims wanted to put the trauma behind them and never look back. I couldn't blame them for that choice. By mid-afternoon, Maya and I had created a comprehensive timeline that connected all 3 confirmed victims with Dominic's known activities. The pattern was unmistakable. He targeted successful professional women in their late 20s to mid-30s, established trust over a period of months, gradually gained control of their finances, and then vanished with their money once he'd extracted as much as possible. The timing of each theft corresponded with his next relationship beginning, suggesting he was using money stolen from one victim to fund the seduction of the next. It's a pyramid scheme, Maya said, studying the timeline. But instead of recruiting downlines, he's just moving from victim to victim in sequence. Exactly. And that pattern is what's going to destroy him in court. Individual cases might look like relationship disputes gone wrong, but when you see the repetition, it's impossible to deny criminal intent. My phone rang. An unknown number with a Vancouver area code. I answered immediately. Is this Diane Keller? A woman's voice, accented with French-Canadian inflections. Yes, this is Diane. This is Claire Dubois. You called my office earlier. A pause. I need to know something before we continue this conversation. Why now? Why is anyone suddenly interested in what Dominic Thorne did to me when 2 years ago no one cared? Because we have multiple victims willing to come forward together, I said. Because patterns that were invisible in isolation become obvious when viewed collectively. And because my daughter is the most recent target, which means the trail is still fresh. Your daughter, Claire said softly. How old is she? 32. I was 31 when I met him. He told me I was the most brilliant woman he'd ever known. He said he wanted to build a life with me. Her voice hardened. He took $215,000 and left me with debt I'm still paying off. Do you know what that does to a person? I'm an accountant, Ms. Keller. I manage other people's money for a living. And I let him steal mine right out from under me. That's not a reflection on your competence, I said gently. That's a reflection on his skill at deception. Everyone keeps saying that. My therapist, my friends, my mother. But it doesn't make the shame go away. She took a shaky breath. Your assistant said you were building a federal case. Is that actually possible? Or is it just something you're saying to get me to cooperate? It's possible if we have enough victims willing to testify. The challenge is proving that this constitutes an ongoing criminal enterprise rather than individual instances of fraud. What do you need from me? Your testimony. Financial records if you still have them. Any communication with Dominic, emails, texts, recordings. And your willingness to go through what I know will be a difficult legal process. I kept everything, Claire said. Every email, every text message, every financial statement. After it happened, I couldn't bring myself to delete any of it. My therapist said I was clinging to evidence because I needed to prove to myself that it had really happened, that I hadn't imagined the whole thing. That evidence could be crucial. Then you can have it. All of it. Because Miss Keller, I need this to be worth something. I need there to be a reason I went through that hell. If helping you means Dominic finally faces consequences, if it means he can't do this to anyone else, then every sleepless night, every panic attack, every moment of self-doubt will have meant something. After I hung up, I looked at Maya, who had been listening to my side of the conversation. That's 3 victims willing to testify, plus you. For women across multiple jurisdictions, spanning 5 years, all with the same pattern of behavior. That's enough to build a federal case. What do we do next? Now I call in some favors. I pulled up my contacts and found the name I was looking for. Sandra Brightwell, a federal prosecutor I'd worked with on several major cases before my retirement. If anyone could take this evidence and turn it into a prosecution that would stick, it was Sandra. She answered on the second ring, her voice warm with recognition. Diane Keller. I heard you retired. Please tell me you're calling because you're bored and want to consult on a case. Something like that, I said. Though this one's personal. It's about my daughter. Sandra's tone shifted immediately. What happened? I gave her the abbreviated version. Dominic's theft, his pattern of targeting multiple women, the evidence we'd gathered, and the 4 victims willing to testify. When I finished, there was a long silence on the other end. Diane, you know I'd do anything to help you. But what you're describing is incredibly complex from a prosecution standpoint. Fraud cases across multiple jurisdictions with romantic relationships involved are notoriously difficult to prove beyond reasonable doubt. But not impossible. Not impossible, she agreed. But it would require resources, time, and a level of victim cooperation that's rare in these cases. The defense will argue that these were consensual relationships that ended badly, that money was shared willingly, That the women are just bitter exes seeking revenge. Which is why we need the pattern evidence. One woman could be a bitter ex. For women with identical experiences is a criminal enterprise. Sandra was quiet for a moment. Send me everything you have. Every document, every statement, every piece of evidence. I'll review it and see if there's enough to bring to the U.S. attorney. But Diane, I need you to prepare your daughter for the possibility that this might not go the way you want. Even with strong evidence, these cases can fall apart in court. I understand, but we have to try. After ending the call, I spent the next several hours organizing all the evidence we gathered into a comprehensive file. Maya worked beside me, her analytical skills proving invaluable as she cross-referenced financial documents and created visualizations showing how money had flowed from each victim's accounts into Dominic's network of shell companies and offshore accounts. By evening, we had a document that told an undeniable story. Dominic Thorne had operated a systematic fraud scheme for at least 5 years, targeting 4 confirmed victims and likely many more, stealing over $900,000 in total, and using sophisticated financial structures to hide his gains. This is really strong, Maya said, reviewing the final compilation. Even I can see how damning this is, and I'm not a lawyer. Now we wait, I said. Sandra will need time to review everything and decide if she can take it to the U.S. attorney. How long? Could be days, could be weeks. Federal prosecution moves slowly. Maya's phone buzzed again. Another text from Dominic. I know you're talking to people. I know you're trying to build something against me. But Maya, think about this carefully. Do you really want to go through a trial? Do you want everyone you know reading about how you let me take your money? How you were too blind to see what was happening? I'm offering you a way out with some dignity intact. Take it. He's monitoring us somehow, I said immediately, taking her phone and examining it. He knows we've been making calls and gathering evidence. Maya went pale. How is that possible? Spyware probably installed on your phone when you were still together. Or he might have access to your cloud accounts. I opened her phone settings and began checking for suspicious applications. Sure enough, there was a monitoring app hidden in her system files, disguised as a battery optimization tool. He's been watching everything I do, Maya whispered, horror dawning on her face. Every call, every text, every email. Not anymore. I deleted the application and then performed a factory reset on her phone. We'll set up new accounts on a clean device. Everything from now on goes through encrypted channels he can't access. But the damage was done. Dominic now knew we were gathering victims and building a case. That meant he'd be taking steps to protect himself, moving money again, possibly establishing new identities, doing everything he could to stay ahead of prosecution. We need to move faster, I said, already texting Sandra Brightwell. The advantage of surprise is gone. Now it's a race. Maya watched me work with an expression that mixed admiration and anxiety. Mom, what if we lose? What if we do all this and he still gets away? I stopped and looked at her directly. Then we'll have done everything in our power to stop him. And sometimes, Maya, that's all we can do. But I've spent my career betting on justice, even when the odds look terrible. And more often than not, the good guys win in the end. Not because the system is perfect, but because people like you and Jennifer and Rachel and Claire refuse to give up. My phone rang. Sandra Brightwell, calling back within hours instead of the days I'd expected. Diane, I've been reviewing what you sent. This is stronger than I initially thought. The financial trail is clear, the pattern is undeniable, and the fact that he just threatened your daughter via text gives us recent evidence of ongoing criminal behavior. She paused. I'm taking this to the U.S. attorney tomorrow morning. I can't promise anything, but I think we have a real shot at getting an indictment. Relief flooded through me. Thank you, Sandra. Don't thank me yet. Even if we get the indictment, we still have to find him and bring him back to face charges. Do you have any idea where he actually is? Working on it, I said, glancing at Maya. But we'll find him. People like Dominic always make mistakes eventually. It's just a matter of waiting for the right one. After hanging up, I turned to find Maya watching me with tears in her eyes. We're really doing this, she said. We're actually fighting back. Yes, we are. And Maya, no matter what happens, I need you to know something. You're not broken. You're not stupid. You're not weak. You're a survivor who refused to accept victimhood as a permanent condition. That takes more strength than most people will ever need to find in themselves. She crossed the room and hugged me tightly, and I held my daughter the way I had when she was small, and the world seemed too big and frightening. Except now we weren't hiding from the world. We were preparing to fight it on our own terms. My laptop chimed with an incoming email. The sender was an address I didn't recognize, but the subject line made my blood run cold. You should have taken my offer. I opened it to find a single attachment. A photo of my house taken from the street, time-stamped from earlier that afternoon. The message below read, I know where you live. I know where you work. I know everything about you, Diane. Just like I knew everything about your daughter. Back off or you'll regret it. Maya read over my shoulder and gasped. He's threatening you now. Mom, this is too dangerous. But I felt only cold clarity. Dominic had just made his fatal mistake. By threatening me directly, he'd committed a federal crime that was impossible to explain away as a relationship dispute. This wasn't fraud that could be disguised as consensual money sharing. This was witness intimidation, and it was a felony. I forwarded the email to Sandra Brightwell and James Morrison, then looked at Maya. He just handed us exactly what we needed. Threatening a witness in a federal investigation is serious jail time, and there's no ambiguity about intent. But what if he actually comes here? What if he tries to hurt you? He won't, I said with certainty. Dominic is a coward who preys on people's trust and affection. Direct violence isn't his style because it's too risky and leaves too much evidence. This threat is his last desperate attempt to regain control. And it's not going to work. I replied to his email with a single line. See you in court. Then I called James Morrison and requested police protection for my house, explaining about the threat. Within an hour, a patrol car was stationed outside, and I had the security system I'd been meaning to install for years finally set up and activated. As darkness fell outside, Maya and I sat at the kitchen table reviewing the evidence one more time, preparing for whatever came next. Somewhere out there, Dominic Thorne was realizing that he'd finally met an adversary he couldn't manipulate or intimidate. And tomorrow, the full weight of federal law enforcement would begin moving against him. What do you think happens next? Maya asked. Now we wait for Sandra to get the indictment. Once that happens, federal marshals will start actively hunting for him. He can run, but eventually he'll make a mistake. He'll use a credit card in his real name, or cross a border with a flagged passport, or contact someone who leads us right to him. And then he faces trial for fraud, wire transfer violations, witness intimidation, and anything else we can prove. With 4 victims testifying to the same pattern, with the financial evidence documenting his systematic theft, with his own threats on record, his defense options are limited. Maya nodded slowly, processing everything. I keep thinking about what Jennifer said, about needing this to mean something. I feel that too. Like if I can turn this nightmare into something that stops him from hurting anyone else, then maybe it wasn't completely pointless. It was never pointless, I said firmly. Pain without purpose is tragedy. But pain that leads to growth, to change, to justice, that's transformation. You're transforming, Maya. I can see it happening. She smiled, a small but genuine smile that reminded me of the confident woman she'd been before Dominic had systematically dismantled her self-assurance. That woman was coming back, stronger for having been tested. My phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer Ashford. I've been thinking about what you said, about how we're the only ones who can stop him. I want to meet your daughter. I think we need to talk to each other, all of us who survived him. When can we set that up? I showed the message to Maya, who read it and nodded. Yes, I need that. I need to talk to people who understand. I'll arrange it, I promised. We'll bring all 4 of you together, either in person or virtually. You'll build strength from each other. As the evening stretched toward night, I thought about the case taking shape around us. It wasn't just about recovering money or punishing a criminal, though both of those things mattered. It was about refusing to accept the role of victim as a permanent identity. It was about women who had been targeted because they were successful and intelligent, proving that those same qualities made them dangerous opponents when they chose to fight back. Dominic Thorne had built his entire operation on the assumption that shame and embarrassment would keep his victims silent, that the emotional devastation he caused would prevent them from pursuing justice. He'd gambled that isolated women would stay isolated, that individual losses would remain individual, rather than connecting into a pattern. He'd miscalculated badly, because now Maya wasn't alone. She was part of a network of survivors who were pooling their resources, their evidence, and their determination. And I, with my 3 decades of experience building cases that others thought unwinnable, was coordinating their efforts into something that could finally bring him down. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The U.S. attorney might decline to prosecute despite Sandra's advocacy. Dominic might flee to a country without extradition treaties. The victims might struggle with the emotional toll of testifying. 100 things could go wrong. But tonight, in my kitchen, with my daughter beside me and 3 other survivors willing to stand with us, I felt something I hadn't felt in years of comfortable retirement. I felt purpose. I felt the clarity that came from knowing you were on the right side of a fight that mattered. And I felt absolutely certain that Dominic Thorne's days of freedom were numbered. The conference room at the Federal Building in downtown Portland felt sterile and impersonal, all pale gray walls and fluorescent lighting that made everyone look slightly ill. Sandra Brightwell had arranged for us to meet here on a Saturday morning, neutral territory where the 4 women whose lives Dominic Thorne had systematically dismantled could finally come together. I arrived early with Maya, who had been awake since 5 in the morning, cycling through outfits and trying to decide what one wore to meet other survivors of the same predator. She'd finally settled on simple black pants and a cream sweater, professional but not intimidating. Her hands trembled slightly as we rode the elevator to the 8th floor. Jennifer Ashford was already waiting when we entered, a slender woman with short dark hair and intelligent eyes that assessed us carefully before she stood to shake hands. She was dressed similarly to Maya, as though they'd both unconsciously chosen armor that wouldn't draw attention or judgment. "You look exactly like your photo," Jennifer said to Maya, and there was something in her voice that suggested she found this both comforting and unsettling. Perhaps seeing someone else who fit Dominic's apparent type made his predation feel less personally targeted and more coldly systematic. "Thank you for coming," Maya said quietly. "I know this can't be easy." "None of this is easy," Jennifer replied. "But your mother convinced me it might be necessary." Rachel Martinez arrived next, a petite woman with honey-colored skin and worry lines around her eyes that seemed too deep for someone only 29 years old. She moved hesitantly into the room, as though expecting judgment or rejection, and visibly relaxed when Maya immediately stood to greet her warmly. "I was so scared to come," Rachel admitted after introductions. "I kept thinking maybe this was some kind of trick, or that everyone would blame me for being stupid enough to trust him." "We all trusted him," Jennifer said firmly. "That's what he was good at, making smart women feel like trusting him was the intelligent choice." Claire Dubois was the last to arrive, apologizing for the delay caused by her early morning flight from Vancouver. She was older than the others, mid-30s with silver threaded through her dark hair, and a composed demeanor that spoke of hard-won control. But I noticed how her hands clenched and unclenched at her sides as she surveyed the room, taking in these 3 other women who represented a club no one wanted to join. "This is surreal," Claire said, accepting the coffee I offered her. "I've spent 2 years trying to convince myself I was the only one, that it was something specific about me that made me vulnerable to him. Seeing all of you, knowing there are probably others we haven't found yet, it changes everything." Sandra Brightwell entered then, carrying a thick folder and wearing the expression I remembered from our years working together, focused intensity barely concealing fierce determination. She was in her mid-40s with steel gray hair she refused to dye and a reputation for prosecuting cases other attorneys thought unwinnable. "Thank you all for being here," Sandra began without preamble, settling at the head of the conference table. "I know Diane has explained the basic situation, but I want to make sure everyone understands what we're attempting and what it will require from each of you." She opened her folder and pulled out a document I recognized as a draft indictment. "Yesterday afternoon, the U.S. attorney agreed to pursue federal charges against Dominic Thorne, also known as Dominic Pierce, also known as Daniel Thornton, for wire fraud, money laundering, identity theft, and witness intimidation. These charges carry potential sentences totaling up to 40 years in federal prison." A collective intake of breath circled the table. 40 years. The number seemed both impossibly large and somehow inadequate given the cumulative damage Dominic had inflicted. The challenge, Sandra continued, is that fraud cases involving romantic relationships are notoriously difficult to prosecute. Defense attorneys will argue that money was shared consensually within partnerships, that these were relationships gone bad, rather than criminal enterprises. Our advantage is that we have 4 victims spanning 5 years who will testify to identical patterns of behavior. That transforms this from he said, she said into documented criminal activity. What exactly will we have to do? Rachel asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Each of you will need to provide detailed testimony about your relationship with Dominic, the financial transactions that occurred, and how those transactions were obtained. You'll be deposed by both prosecution and defense attorneys. Eventually, if this goes to trial, you'll testify in open court and undergo cross-examination. Claire's expression hardened, which means having our judgment questioned, our financial decisions scrutinized, our personal lives dissected by lawyers trying to make us look foolish or vindictive. Yes, Sandra said bluntly. I won't lie to you. This process will be difficult and invasive. Defense attorneys will attempt to discredit each of you individually. They'll suggest you were willing participants who simply regret your choices now. They'll imply you're motivated by revenge rather than justice. They'll try to make you feel on trial instead of Dominic. Then why should we do it? Rachel asked, tears forming in her eyes. If it's just going to be more trauma on top of what he already did to us? Because collectively, your testimonies are much stronger than individually, Sandra explained. One woman claiming fraud in a romantic relationship is vulnerable to character assassination. For women, describing identical experiences across multiple years creates an undeniable pattern. And because every difficult question you answer on the stand is one less opportunity for defense to create reasonable doubt. Maya had been quiet throughout this exchange, but now she spoke up. What happens if we go through all of this and he's found not guilty? Sandra met her eyes steadily. That's a possibility we have to acknowledge. Federal prosecution has a 93% conviction rate, but that remaining 7% exists. However, even if criminal prosecution fails, the evidence we gather can support civil cases. You could potentially recover damages through civil court even if criminal court doesn't convict. But the primary goal is criminal conviction, I clarified. Because that's what stops him from doing this to anyone else. Exactly, Sandra agreed. Civil judgments can be avoided through bankruptcy or asset hiding. Criminal convictions result in prison time and permanent records that make it much harder to continue victimizing people. Jennifer leaned forward, her expression intense. I need to understand something. Is this case strong enough that you genuinely believe we can win? Or are we being asked to sacrifice our privacy and peace of mind for a long-shot attempt at justice? Sandra considered the question carefully. Based on the evidence Diane has compiled, the financial records documenting systematic theft, the pattern of behavior across multiple victims, and the recent witness intimidation, I believe this case has better than 70% odds of conviction. Those are excellent odds by prosecution standards. But I can't guarantee anything, and I won't insult you by pretending this is certain. 70%, Claire repeated. Those are better odds than I had when I reported him the first time and the prosecutor declined to file charges at all. The difference is the pattern evidence, I explained. Individual cases looked ambiguous. Collectively, they're damning. That's why your cooperation is essential. Without multiple victims willing to testify, we don't have pattern evidence. Without pattern evidence, Dominic's defense becomes much stronger. Rachel wiped at her eyes. I lost my apartment because of him. I lost my job because I couldn't focus after what happened. I've spent the last year rebuilding from nothing. If testifying means there's a 70% chance he can't do that to someone else, then I have to try, right? Even if it's hard? Only you can decide that, Sandra said gently. But Rachel, I want you to know that if you choose to participate, we'll do everything possible to protect you throughout this process. Victim advocates, therapy resources, financial assistance for travel and time off work. You won't be alone in this. None of you will be alone, I added. That's part of why I wanted us to meet today. So you could see each other. Understand that you're part of a group rather than isolated victims. What Dominic did to each of you individually was wrong. What he did collectively was a criminal enterprise. And enterprises can be dismantled. Maya reached across the table and took Rachel's hand. We're in this together. Whatever happens, we face it together. Jennifer nodded slowly. I'm in. I went through hell the first time I tried to get justice, and I swore I'd never put myself through that again. But if there's a real chance of stopping him this time, I can't walk away from that. Claire was quiet for a long moment, her gaze distant. Finally she spoke. 2 years ago, when I reported what he'd done, the police treated me like I was wasting their time. The prosecutor told me romantic financial disputes weren't criminal matters. My own lawyer suggested I was being vindictive because Dominic had left me for someone younger. Do you know what that does to a person? To be told that your suffering doesn't matter, that your trauma is just embarrassing evidence of poor judgment? I do know, I said quietly. I've watched it happen to hundreds of women over my career. The system fails victims constantly, and that failure compounds the original harm. But Claire, sometimes the system works. Sometimes cases get prosecuted. Sometimes justice actually happens. And this time you have resources and support you didn't have before. I'll testify, Claire said finally. But I need something in return. I need regular updates about the case progress. I need to feel like a participant in this process rather than just evidence to be used. I need agency. That's completely reasonable, Sandra agreed. I'll provide regular briefings to all 4 of you throughout the prosecution. You'll know what's happening every step of the way. With all 4 victims committed, Sandra began outlining the timeline. Federal indictments would be filed within the week. Arrest warrants would be issued for all of Dominic's known aliases. Interpol would be notified given his pattern of crossing international borders. The U.S. Marshals Service would begin active pursuit. Do we know where he is now? Jennifer asked. Last confirmed location was Vancouver International Airport, I said. But that was based on a phone call that might have been spoofed. My investigator contacts are tracking his financial footprint, looking for credit card usage or bank transactions that would reveal his actual location. What about the woman he's with? Sienna? Maya asked. Is she part of this or is she another victim? Sandra pulled out another document. We've been investigating Sienna Caldwell's background. The identity appears to be fabricated. No birth records, no tax history, no paper trail prior to 6 months ago. We believe she may be a partner in the fraud operation rather than another victim. So there are 2 of them? Rachel's voice rose slightly. He has someone helping him do this? It's not uncommon in romance fraud operations, Sandra explained. Sometimes criminals work in teams, with one person building trust while the other provides cover stories or helps move money. If Sienna is a partner, that actually strengthens our case because it demonstrates planning and organization consistent with criminal enterprise charges. The meeting continued for another 2 hours as Sandra walked each woman through what their testimony would entail, the types of questions they'd face during cross-examination, and the timeline for depositions and potential trial dates. It was exhaustive and exhausting, but necessary preparation for what lay ahead. When we finally took a break, I found Maya standing by the window overlooking downtown Portland, her expression pensive. What are you thinking? I asked, joining her. I'm thinking about how different they all are, she said quietly. Jennifer's a software engineer. Rachel works in marketing, Claire's an accountant, and I'm in finance. We have different backgrounds, different personalities, different lives. But Dominic saw something in each of us that made us targets. I keep wondering what that was. Success, I said simply. Professional competence. Financial stability. You all had something worth taking, and you all had the kind of busy careers that made you vulnerable to someone offering to handle life's details. That wasn't random, Maya. He selected you specifically because you fit a profile he knew how to exploit. It makes me feel like prey, she admitted. Like I never had a chance because I was exactly what he was hunting for. Or it means you were successful and accomplished enough to be worth his time, I countered. Don't let him rewrite your achievements as vulnerabilities. The fact that you built savings worth stealing is evidence of your competence, not your weakness. She considered this, then nodded slowly. Jennifer said something similar earlier. that we need to reclaim our narratives from him, refuse to let his version of events become the truth. Jennifer's right. That's part of what testimony does. It lets you tell your story in your own words, establish the record of what actually happened rather than letting his lies stand unchallenged. Maya turned from the window to face me directly. Mom, I need to ask you something. And I need you to be completely honest with me. Always. Do you think we're going to win this? Really win, not just make a good effort? I looked at my daughter, seeing both the vulnerable woman who'd shown up at my door 5 days ago, and the stronger person she was becoming. I think we have an excellent case with strong evidence and determined victims. I think Sandra is one of the best prosecutors in the federal system. I think Dominic made critical mistakes by threatening us and by leaving such a clear pattern of criminal behavior. But Maya, I've worked enough cases to know that nothing is certain. Juries are unpredictable. Defense attorneys are skilled at creating doubt. Victims sometimes struggle on the stand because testifying is re-traumatizing. So you're saying we might lose? I'm saying we might lose even though we're doing everything right. But I'm also saying that fighting is worth it regardless of the outcome. Because you'll know you didn't accept victimhood passively. You'll know you stood up and demanded accountability. And that matters whether or not a jury ultimately agrees with us. Maya absorbed this, then surprised me by smiling. That's what I needed to hear. Not false promises about certain victory, but honest acknowledgement that this is hard and uncertain and still worth doing. When we reconvened, Sandra had additional news. We've had a development while we were on break. One of Dominic's credit cards was used an hour ago at a luxury hotel in Mexico City. Federal agents are coordinating with Mexican authorities to locate and detain him. The energy in the room immediately shifted. Mexico City. Not Vancouver. Not some remote location beyond reach. A major city with strong extradition agreements with the United States. How long until they can arrest him? Jennifer asked. If he's still at that hotel, potentially within hours. But we have to assume he's aware of law enforcement interests given his threat to Diane. He may have already moved on. Or he may have gotten comfortable, I suggested. Criminals often do after successfully evading consequences for years. They start to believe they're untouchable. My phone buzzed with a text from James Morrison. Mexican federal police have eyes on the hotel. Subject confirmed on property with female matching description of Sienna Caldwell. Awaiting extradition paperwork to move. I showed the message to Sandra, who immediately began making calls to expedite the necessary documentation. Within minutes, she had federal judges on the line authorizing expedited warrants. The 4 victims sat in tense silence, watching Sandra work with the focused efficiency of someone who'd orchestrated international arrests before. This was happening. After years of Dominic operating with impunity, after multiple victims reporting him and being dismissed, after systematic theft and emotional destruction, he was finally about to face real consequences. What happens when they arrest him? Claire asked. How long until he's brought back to the United States? Mexican extradition typically takes a few weeks, Sandra explained between phone calls. But given the nature of the charges and the cooperation agreements between our countries, we can expedite. I'd estimate he'll be in federal custody in Portland within a month. A month, Rachel repeated. That's so fast. I thought this would take years. Building the case took time, Sandra said. Actually arresting him once we know where he is happens quickly. That's the advantage of federal resources. My phone buzzed again. James. Arrest in progress. Subject attempting to flee. Female companion in custody as well. I read the update aloud and Maya made a small sound, something between a laugh and a sob. He ran. Of course he ran. He's been running his whole life. Not anymore, Jennifer said quietly. There's nowhere left to run. Sandra's phone rang and she answered immediately, listening intently before thanking whoever was on the other end. They have him. Both Dominic Thorne and the woman using the name Sienna Caldwell are in custody of Mexican federal police. Extradition paperwork is being processed. He'll be arraigned in federal court here within 30 days. The room erupted in a strange combination of relief, disbelief, and residual anger. For women who had spent years believing justice was impossible were suddenly confronting the reality that it might actually happen. Claire started crying silently, tears streaming down her face as she sat rigidly in her chair. Rachel moved to comfort her, and then she was crying too. Jennifer remained dry-eyed but was breathing in sharp, controlled gasps as though she just finished running a marathon. Maya looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite interpret, something raw and complicated that mixed triumph with grief for everything she'd lost that couldn't be recovered. "This is good news," Sandra said firmly. "This is exactly what we wanted. But I need all of you to understand that this is just the beginning. Arrest doesn't mean conviction. We still have to prove the case in court. And Dominic will have access to lawyers who will fight every step of this prosecution." "Let them fight," Jennifer said, her voice steady despite the emotion churning beneath. "We're not backing down, right?" She looked around the table, seeking confirmation from the other three women. One by one they nodded. Maya, then Rachel, then Claire. A silent pact forming between people who'd been strangers hours ago, but were now bound by shared trauma and shared determination. "Then we prepare," I said, taking charge in the way I'd done in hundreds of investigations. "Sandra will handle the legal prosecution. I'll continue gathering evidence and coordinating witness preparation. Each of you will work with victim advocates to manage the emotional impact of this process. And together, we're going to build a case so thorough that Dominic Thorne's defense team won't know where to start." Over the next several hours, we organized ourselves into something resembling a war council. Sandra outlined the discovery process, explaining what evidence defense would be entitled to access and what strategies they might employ. I created a shared document system where all 4 victims could securely upload relevant materials, financial records, communications, and personal accounts. We established regular video conferences so everyone could stay informed regardless of geographic separation. By the time we finished, it was late afternoon and the federal building was largely deserted. We walked out together, 4 victims and 2 advocates, emerging into a Portland autumn that felt simultaneously normal and utterly transformed. "I need to say something," Claire announced as we stood on the courthouse steps. "I came here this morning thinking this was probably a waste of time, that I was setting myself up for disappointment again. But spending today with all of you, seeing how thoroughly you've prepared this case, I actually believe we might win. And even if we don't, I believe the attempt matters. So thank you. Thank you for not letting him get away with it quietly." "We're not letting him get away with it at all," Maya said firmly. "Whatever it takes, however long it takes, we're seeing this through." After the others had left for their hotels or flights home, Maya and I drove back to my house in silence. The patrol car was still stationed outside, a reminder that Dominic's arrest in Mexico didn't mean the threat was entirely neutralized. He had resources we likely hadn't discovered yet, possibly accomplices beyond the woman calling herself Sienna. Inside, Maya collapsed onto the couch with visible exhaustion. "I can't believe this is real. 5 days ago, I showed up at your door thinking my life was over. Now we have him in custody and federal charges filed." 5 days, I repeated, marveling at how much had changed. "You've done more in 5 days than most victims manage in 5 years. "I had help," she said, looking at me with clear gratitude. "I had you." I sat beside her, taking her hand. "You had yourself too, Maya. You documented what was happening when you didn't even fully realize why. You saved evidence. You reached out when you could have hidden in shame. You chose to fight instead of accepting victimhood. That wasn't me. That was you. I learned it from you," she said quietly. "Watching you work all those cases growing up, seeing how you never gave up on victims even when everyone else told them to move on. I learned that fighting back was possible." My phone buzzed with a news alert. I opened it to find a headline from a major Portland newspaper: "Federal authorities arrest suspected romance fraud operator in Mexico. Multiple victims across 3 states involved in case." The story was brief, lacking details still protected by ongoing investigation, but the fact that it was already public meant Dominic's arrest had attracted media attention. That attention could be beneficial, potentially bringing forward additional victims we hadn't found, but it also meant increased scrutiny of everyone involved. "It started," I said, showing Maya the article, "the public phase of this case." She read quickly, her expression hardening. They're calling him a suspected operator. Like it's still a question whether he did it. That's proper journalism before conviction, I explained. Innocent until proven guilty applies to media coverage too, at least nominally. But Maya, once the details come out, once your testimonies are public record, there won't be much ambiguity about his guilt. Will our names be public? Eventually, yes. Victim names are typically included in court documents. But Sandra will fight to keep identifying information sealed as long as possible. And we can request that media use initials rather than full names in coverage. Maya nodded slowly, processing this new reality. I hadn't thought about that part. Everyone knowing what happened to me. There's no shame in being defrauded by a skilled criminal, I reminded her. The shame belongs entirely to him. I know that intellectually, she said. But emotionally it's harder. We spent the evening fielding calls from the other victims, all of them having seen the same news coverage and grappling with similar anxieties about public exposure. Jennifer was philosophical, noting that her previous attempt to report Dominic had already made her story semi-public in Seattle legal circles. Rachel was more anxious, worried about professional repercussions if clients at her marketing firm learned she'd been defrauded. Claire sounded grimly satisfied that Dominic's arrest was making headlines, as though his very public downfall provided some measure of justice for her very private suffering. By the time Maya and I finally said goodnight and retreated to our respective rooms, it was after midnight. But I found myself unable to sleep, my investigator's brain still spinning through possibilities and concerns. Dominic's arrest was a major victory, but it also escalated the stakes dramatically. He would now have access to legal counsel, discovery materials, and strategic options he hadn't possessed while simply evading law enforcement. His defense team would begin constructing counter-narratives, looking for weaknesses in witness testimony, searching for ways to create reasonable doubt. And there was still the question of Sienna Caldwell, whoever she really was. If she was indeed a partner in Dominic's operations rather than another victim, her testimony could either strengthen our case dramatically or create complications depending on what deals she might make with prosecutors. I pulled out my laptop and began researching similar fraud cases, looking for patterns in successful prosecutions and failed ones. The most successful cases had multiple corroborating witnesses, clear financial trails, and evidence of systematic planning, rather than opportunistic crime. We had all of that. The failed cases typically involved single victims whose testimony could be undermined by suggesting relationship dysfunction, rather than criminal intent. We'd successfully avoided that vulnerability by organizing multiple victims. But failed cases also often featured defendants with substantial resources to mount aggressive defenses, and we had to assume Dominic had hidden assets beyond what we'd already traced. He'd been operating this fraud for at least 5 years that we knew of, probably longer. Even accounting for lifestyle expenses, he should have accumulated significant wealth. Where was that money now? I made notes for Sandra to pursue aggressive asset discovery, looking for offshore accounts, shell companies, property held in false names. If we could freeze those assets, we'd both recover money for victims and limit Dominic's ability to fund his defense. My phone lit up with an email notification. 2 in the morning, so probably international correspondence. I opened it to find a message from an address I didn't recognize. Subject line: "There are more of us." The message read, "My name is Catherine Brennan. I saw the news about Dominic Thorne's arrest. He did the same thing to me 4 years ago in Chicago. I never reported it because I was embarrassed and I didn't think anyone would believe me. But if there are multiple victims coming forward, I want to help. I have financial records, emails, everything. He took $90,000 from me and destroyed my credit. If my testimony can help convict him, I'll do whatever you need." I sat staring at the message, feeling both vindication and sorrow. Vindication because another victim meant stronger pattern evidence. Sorrow because it represented yet another woman whose life had been damaged by Dominic's predation. I forwarded the email to Sandra with a note. "Victim number 5. Likely more coming as news spreads. We should establish a formal process for vetting and incorporating additional testimonies." Her response came within minutes despite the late hour. "Agreed. I'll have my office set up a dedicated tip line tomorrow. Every additional victim strengthens the pattern case." This is exactly what we hoped would happen. What we hoped would happen. The phrase echoed in my mind as I finally closed my laptop and tried to sleep. We'd hoped that making Dominic's arrest public would encourage other victims to come forward. We'd hoped that no one would have to face him alone anymore. We'd hoped that the system, so often failing victims of romance fraud, might actually work this time. And so far improbably our hopes were being realized. But I knew from experience that hope was fragile, that cases could collapse at any stage, that justice was never guaranteed no matter how strong the evidence. Still, as I drifted toward sleep, I felt something I hadn't experienced in the 2 years since retirement, the fierce satisfaction of active investigation, of pieces falling into place, of a case building toward inevitable conclusion. Dominic Thorne had spent years believing he was smarter than his victims, more clever than law enforcement, immune to consequences. He'd built an entire life around that belief, that sense of superiority and invulnerability. He was about to learn how wrong he'd been. And I was going to ensure that lesson was as thorough and devastating as the damage he'd inflicted on every woman whose trust he'd betrayed. The extradition took 23 days instead of the estimated month, expedited by Dominic's decision not to fight the transfer. Sandra suspected his attorney had advised cooperation to appear less guilty, but I knew it was strategic calculation. Fighting extradition would have kept him in a Mexican detention facility under far worse conditions than federal custody in the United States. Dominic was nothing if not practical about his own comfort. I was standing outside the federal courthouse when the transport van arrived, watching from across the street as marshals led him inside wearing orange detention coveralls and restraints. Whitmore argued that these were consensual romantic relationships where partners shared finances willingly. He suggested the women misunderstood standard relationship dynamics as criminal behavior after breakups soured. He painted Dominic as a serial monogamist who happened to date financially successful women, not a predator who targeted them. The depositions were brutal. Whitmore questioned each victim about their relationship history, their financial decisions, even their emotional stability. He asked Maya why she hadn't noticed the theft sooner if she was such a skilled financial analyst. He asked Jennifer if she'd been drinking when she authorized certain transfers. He suggested Rachel had been careless with her passwords. He implied Claire's age made her particularly vulnerable to younger men's attention. I sat through every deposition, watching these women face their worst fears about how they'd be perceived and judged. And I watched them refuse to break. They answered honestly, acknowledging mistakes while firmly maintaining that those mistakes didn't excuse Dominic's systematic theft and deception. The breakthrough came when forensic accountants traced money from all 9 victims flowing into the same series of offshore accounts. The financial web was complex, but the destination was singular. Every dollar stolen eventually converged in accounts controlled by Dominic under various aliases. It was impossible to argue coincidence or consensual sharing, when the money from completely separate relationships all ended up in the same place. Additionally, analysis of the woman arrested with Dominic revealed her real identity. Sienna Marshall, age 38, with a criminal history including identity theft and fraud. She wasn't another victim. She was an experienced con artist who'd partnered with Dominic to run a sophisticated operation. Under pressure from prosecutors, she agreed to testify against him in exchange for a reduced sentence. Her testimony in a pre-trial proffer session was devastating. She described how she and Dominic worked together, with her sometimes posing as his sister, business partner, or friend to provide legitimacy. She'd helped create fake business documents, forged references, even posed for photos that became part of his constructed identity. She estimated they'd targeted at least 15 women over a decade, though many victims never reported the crimes. He called it harvesting, she told Sandra during the proffer, her voice flat and emotionless. He'd identify targets, build relationships, harvest their assets, and move on. He was very methodical about it. Spreadsheets tracking each woman's net worth, optimal timing for large transfers, exit strategies. The trial began on a cold January morning 6 months after Maya had knocked on my door. The courtroom was packed with media, victim advocates, and observers drawn by the sensational nature of the case. Dominic sat at the defense table in a well-tailored suit, his appearance carefully managed to appear respectable and sympathetic. But the restraints on his wrists, required given his flight risk, undermined the image his lawyers were trying to project. Sandra's opening statement was precise and methodical. She outlined the pattern of behavior across multiple victims, the financial evidence demonstrating systematic theft, and the testimony that would prove criminal intent rather than relationship dysfunction. She described Dominic not as a Romeo but as a predator who weaponized intimacy for profit. Whitmore's opening painted a different picture. He acknowledged that relationships had ended badly, that money had been shared and then disputed, but he argued these were civil matters, not crimes. He suggested the prosecution was criminalizing normal relationship dynamics to satisfy vengeful ex-girlfriends. The first week of trial focused on financial evidence. Forensic accountants walked the jury through complex money trails, showing how funds moved from victim accounts into Dominic's control. Charts and graphs demonstrated the systematic nature of the theft, the carefully timed transfers designed to avoid triggering fraud alerts, the offshore accounts that concealed stolen money. The second week brought victim testimony. Maya went first, her voice steady as she recounted meeting Dominic, the gradual erosion of her financial autonomy, and the devastating discovery of his theft. Whitmore's cross-examination was aggressive, but Maya had prepared thoroughly. When he suggested she'd been careless with her finances, she calmly explained her professional credentials and systematic approach to money management. When he implied she was bitter about the breakup, she noted that discovering systematic theft and poisoning attempts wasn't bitterness but appropriate response to crime. Jennifer testified next, describing a nearly identical pattern 3 years earlier. Then Rachel, then Claire. By the time the fourth victim had told her story, the pattern was undeniable. These weren't failed relationships. They were systematic victimization following a practice script. Sienna Marshall's testimony was the prosecution's hammer blow. She described the operation in clinical detail, showing jurors exactly how deliberate and calculated every aspect had been. She provided emails discussing which victims had the most accessible assets. She shared recordings of planning sessions where she and Dominic strategized about manipulation techniques. The defense tried to discredit her, suggesting she was testifying to reduce her own sentence, but the evidence she provided corroborated everything the victims had described. Her insider knowledge validated their experiences in ways that left little room for reasonable doubt. Closing arguments came 3 weeks after trial began. Even from a distance, I could see he'd lost weight, his face gaunt and unshaven. The confident, charming man who'd stolen from my daughter looked diminished, almost ordinary. Maya had chosen not to attend the arraignment, deciding she wasn't ready to see him in person yet. But Jennifer had flown in from Seattle, and Claire had driven down from Vancouver. They stood with me in silent witness as the man who destroyed their lives shuffled into federal court to face charges that could imprison him for decades. The arraignment itself was brief and procedural. Dominic pleaded not guilty through his attorney, Preston Whitmore, a defense lawyer known for representing white-collar criminals. Bail was denied given flight risk and the international nature of his arrest. A trial date was set for 4 months out, expedited by federal standards, but still an eternity for victims waiting for closure. As we left the courthouse, Jennifer turned to me with an expression of grim satisfaction. He looked small in there. Powerless. I needed to see that. Justice has a way of cutting people down to size. I agreed. All the charm and manipulation in the world doesn't work when you're in restraints facing federal charges. Over the following weeks, Sandra's office was flooded with additional victims. Catherine Brennan from Chicago was just the beginning. A woman in Austin contacted us about losing $60,000 3 years ago. Another in Denver described a nearly identical pattern from 5 years back. By the time discovery was complete, we had documented 9 separate victims across 7 years, with total theft exceeding $1.4 million. Each new victim strengthened the pattern case while simultaneously adding complexity to trial preparation. Sandra made the strategic decision to focus on 4 primary victims for trial testimony: Maya, Jennifer, Rachel, and Claire, while using the others to establish pattern evidence if needed. Too many witnesses could overwhelm a jury, she explained. For women, telling the same story was powerful. 9 might feel repetitive. The prosecution strategy centered on demonstrating systematic criminal enterprise, rather than relationship disputes. Sandra planned to present the financial evidence first, showing how money moved from victim accounts into Dominic's network of shell companies and offshore holdings. Then the victims would testify to the patterns of manipulation, isolation, and eventual theft. Finally, expert witnesses would explain how romance fraud operates as a calculated criminal methodology. Dominic's defense strategy became clear during depositions. Sandra's summation was powerful, weaving together all the evidence into an irrefutable narrative of criminal enterprise. Whitmore's closing emphasized reasonable doubt, suggesting the prosecution relied too heavily on emotional testimony, rather than clear proof of criminal intent. The jury deliberated for 2 days. When they returned, the 4 women stood and delivered guilty verdicts on all counts: wire fraud, money laundering, identity theft, witness intimidation. Dominic's face remained impassive, but I saw his hands clench beneath the defense table. Sentencing came 6 weeks later. The judge, a woman in her 60s with a reputation for being tough on financial crimes, didn't mince words. She described Dominic's crimes as particularly heinous because they exploited trust and intimacy. She noted the devastating impact on victims who'd lost not just money, but their sense of safety in relationships. She sentenced him to 28 years in federal prison, to be followed by 3 years supervised release. Additionally, she ordered full restitution to all 9 documented victims, though she acknowledged collection would be difficult given the complexity of Dominic's hidden assets. As marshals led him away, Dominic finally looked at the gallery where his victims sat. His expression was unreadable, but I like to think I saw something there. Not remorse exactly, but perhaps recognition that he'd finally met consequences he couldn't charm or manipulate his way past. Outside the courthouse, Maya stood surrounded by the other victims, all of them tearful but also visibly lighter, as though a weight they'd been carrying had finally lifted. "It's over," Rachel said wonderingly. "It's actually over." "Not completely," Sandra cautioned. "Asset recovery will take time. He'll appeal, though I don't think he has grounds. But the criminal case is resolved. He's going to prison for a very long time. Long enough that when he gets out, I'll be in my 60s, Maya calculated. Long enough that everyone he hurt will have rebuilt their lives completely. Jennifer turned to me, her eyes wet but smiling. "You told us this was possible. When we were all sitting in that conference room feeling hopeless, you said we could win if we worked together. Thank you for believing in us." "You believed in yourselves," I corrected. "I just provided structure and experience. The courage to testify, to face him in court, to refuse to be silenced, that came from each of you." As we dispersed to celebrate or process or simply rest after months of intense legal proceedings, Maya and I drove home in comfortable silence. The patrol car was no longer stationed outside my house. The security system remained, but the immediate threat was gone, locked away in federal detention. Inside, Maya collapsed onto the couch with visible relief. "I keep waiting to feel triumphant, but mostly I just feel tired." "That's normal," I assured her. "You've been running on adrenaline and determination for 6 months. Now that the trial's over, your body and mind are finally allowed to rest." "Do you think he'll actually serve the full sentence?" "Federal prisoners serve at least 85% of their sentences. He'll be incarcerated for at least 24 years, probably longer. And Maya, even after he's released, his criminal record will follow him forever. He'll never be able to run this kind of operation again." She nodded slowly, processing. "The other victims want to stay in touch. Form a support group or something. People who understand what we went through. That's healthy. You've built something important together. A community formed through shared trauma but sustained by shared strength." My phone buzzed with a message from Sandra. U.S. Attorney wants to meet with you about consulting on a task force for romance fraud prosecution. Interested? I showed the message to Maya, who read it and smiled. "You should do it. You're too good at this to stay retired." "I'm not sure. I rather enjoyed retirement until you showed up at my door at 8 in the morning looking devastated." "But you were bored," Maya countered. "Admit it. You missed the work." She wasn't wrong. The past 6 months had reminded me how much I'd thrived on investigation, on building cases, on pursuing justice for people the system too often failed. And there were clearly more victims out there, More predators like Dominic operating with impunity because romance fraud remained under-prosecuted and under-recognized. Maybe part-time consulting, I conceded. I'm too old to go back to full-time investigative work. You're 62, Mom. That's not old. That's experienced. Over the following weeks, life slowly returned to something resembling normal, though normal had been fundamentally redefined. Maya moved back into her own apartment, the condo she'd shared with Dominic having been sold with proceeds divided according to restitution agreements. She'd started her new position with the district attorney's domestic violence unit, applying her financial expertise to cases involving economic abuse. I accepted the consulting position with the Romance Fraud Task Force, working with federal prosecutors to develop better strategies for identifying and prosecuting these cases. The work was deeply satisfying, combining my investigative experience with the hard-won knowledge of how these crimes devastated victims. The support group Maya had mentioned became reality, a monthly virtual meeting where the 9 victims connected to share experiences, offer encouragement, and occasionally just vent frustration with the slow process of asset recovery. I sat in on a few sessions and was consistently impressed by how these women had transformed their trauma into advocacy, several of them now volunteering with organizations that educated the public about romance fraud. Asset recovery proved as difficult as anticipated. Dominic had hidden money well, but forensic accountants were persistent. Over 18 months, they recovered approximately 40% of the stolen funds, distributed proportionally among the victims. It wasn't complete restitution, but it was something, a tangible acknowledgement that their losses mattered. On the 2-year anniversary of Maya's early morning knock on my door, we sat together at my kitchen table drinking coffee and reflecting on everything that had changed. I've been thinking about Aunt Sophie a lot lately, Maya said. About how different things might have been if someone had helped her the way you helped me. Sophie, my sister who died in an abusive relationship before I'd specialized in domestic violence cases. The loss that had shaped my entire career. My determination that no other woman should suffer alone the way Sophie had. Your aunt would be proud of you, I said quietly. Of how you fought back, how you refused to accept victimhood as a permanent identity. I had advantages she didn't, Maya acknowledged. I had you, I had resources, I had a support system. Not everyone does. Which is why the work matters, I said. Every case we prosecute, every victim we support, every predator we stop, it's for all the women who don't have those advantages. It's for Sophie and everyone like her. Maya reached across the table and took my hand. Thank you, Mom, for answering the door that morning, for believing me, for fighting with me, for refusing to let him win. You would have found your way without me, I said honestly. Maybe it would have taken longer, maybe it would have been harder, but you have your aunt's strength in you. You wouldn't have stayed down. Maybe not. But I'm grateful I didn't have to find out. She smiled, the genuine, untroubled smile of someone who'd faced the worst and survived. And I'm grateful that what happened to me means it won't happen to others, at least not by him. That has to count for something. It counted for everything, I thought. Justice wasn't just about punishment or restitution. It was about breaking cycles, preventing future harm, creating a world where predators face consequences before they could destroy more lives. Dominic Thorne would spend decades in prison, and every day he spent there was a day he couldn't target another victim. My phone buzzed with a news alert. Another romance fraud case making headlines, this one in Boston. The prosecutor quoted in the article mentioned how successful pattern prosecution had been in the Thorne case, setting precedent for similar charges. They're citing your case, I said, showing Maya the article, using it as a model for how to prosecute these crimes effectively. She read quickly, then looked up with satisfaction. Good. Let every predator out there know that victims aren't staying silent anymore. That we're building cases and finding each other and refusing to accept that this is just how relationships sometimes end badly. As evening settled around us and our coffee grew cold, I thought about the question Maya had asked me months ago. Did I think we were going to win? I'd given her an honest answer then about uncertainty and the unpredictability of trials. But now, looking at the strong woman sitting across from me, at the community of survivors she'd helped build, at the precedent we'd established for future prosecutions, I realized we'd won something more valuable than a verdict. We'd won the right to define our own narratives, to refuse the shame predators tried to impose, to transform trauma into purpose. Dominic had taken Maya's money and her trust, but he hadn't taken her strength or her determination to ensure he faced consequences. And that, ultimately, was the victory that mattered most. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.